Kia ora. In today's headlines, a political battle is brewing over Thursday's election of Parliament's next Speaker, with the Prime Minister expecting a split vote. John Key has nominated David Carter for the job, but admits he's only told Labour about it through the back door. Labour leader David Shearer is not impressed they have not been consulted.
That's a convention they're flouting. You need a Speaker who has the confidence across the House. David Carter doesn't seem to have any real enthusiasm for the job.
Mr Key expects Labour will push for Maurice Williamson and says the fight over the Speaker will set the mood for Parliament this year.
It'll be more acrimonious for sure. That's what happens the nearer you get to the finishing line for the election.
And he's sympathetic to New Zealand Post's attempts to deal with falling mail volume that's threatening to cripple the postal service. Snail mail has dropped by 24% in the last decade, and that's expected to plunge to 50% within 5 years. The state-owned company is considering cutting mail deliveries to 3 days a week, but needs a government sign-off. Minister Amy Adams says she hasn't yet received advice on how many jobs may be lost as a result of the planned reforms.
What New Zealand Post is saying to me is that it is not an intention that they would immediately go to that if we approved it, but they want to have that sort of flexibility available to them.
New Zealand Post acknowledges poor broadband access could pose a problem for some rural New Zealanders who rely on the service, and has put out a discussion document inviting feedback before making any changes. Bethlehem College is investigating why one of its former students was driving a vehicle involved in the fatal collision in Kenya. It's reported the school doesn't know why David Fellows was driving when the crash happened and is giving him full support. The funerals for the 3 Kiwi victims were held last week. Weaker than expected imports last month have led to a much stronger trade balance. There was a surplus of $486 million, well up from the market expectation, which was a deficit of $105 million. The December figure puts the annual trade balance at a deficit of $1.2 billion. And the government has agreed to contribute up to $32.4 million to a new project in the red meat sector, the country's second biggest exporter. Beef and Lamb New Zealand says the funding will make up around half the costs of the program, with the rest coming from the industry. A Northland fire spanning 200 hectares is finally out. The blaze in Poto ignited last Tuesday and tore through native scrub and wetlands. A Department of Conservation spokeswoman says it was reduced to a smolder on Friday, and a small team remains to damp down any hotspots. Across the Tasman, flooding continues to batter Queensland and New South Wales. 4 people have already been killed by an ex-tropical cyclone, Oswald, and more than 1,500 people in the vulnerable town of Bundaberg have been rescued, but more could be at risk. In Brisbane, authorities believe up to 4,000 properties could end up flooded by the Brisbane River. Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi has declared a state of emergency and imposed a curfew in Port Said, Suez and Ismailia, 3 Suez Canal cities that were the scene of violent clashes last week. Riot police have fired tear gas and birdshot at rock-throwing protesters in Cairo, and more than 30 people were killed in Port Said, protesting the death sentences issued for last February's fatal riot in the town. The eruption of violence at the second anniversary of the anti-Mubarak uprising exposes the deep fault lines running through the country. Protesters across Egypt say Morsi has betrayed the revolution by championing the Muslim Brotherhood's interests over and above the country's. Having pledged millions of dollars in aid to Syria's opposition, the international community is being urged to make good on those promises to the Syrian National Coalition. NATO confirms the first of 6 missile defense batteries sent to Turkey to intercept possible rockets fired from Syria is operational. Al-Assad's government has described the deployment as a provocation. And finally, British vicars have taken to using karaoke-like machines during their services, which play anything from traditional anthems to disco hymns. Developer Hymn Technology says many churches are struggling to find replacements for their retiring organists. And that's where the electronic hymnals step in, with pre-recorded music for churchgoers to sing along to, and there's lyrics on a big screen just like real karaoke. O kanuinga karere matua mai te whare kōrero o rima mauri ora.